I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Tariffs have been making things a lot more crazy, which is why to help creators navigate the situation, we just had a live event where I brought on Dusty Droz, one of the co-founders of Duck Somnium Games, a 3-time Kickstarter creator who is now fulfilling his latest Kickstarter that did over $700,000, and also Justin from ARC Global Logistics, which is a freight forwarding company, meaning they're bringing products into the US on behalf of their clients, acting as a broker with customs, and dealing with all of this madness. So both of these guys are a wealth of knowledge on this subject. And so we dive into how to navigate tariffs with your crowdfunding campaign, whether you're in the pre-launch, live campaign, or post-campaign. So this is a replay of that event. We also have a Q&A where we had a couple hundred creators asking questions. So I think you're going to learn a lot from it. Let's dive in. So real quick, I'm going to go through a little bit of basics. A lot of you probably already know this, but let's just start with really quickly the basics. So what is a tariff? So a tariff is a tax on the declared value of your product entering the US that's shown on the commercial invoice. So another way of thinking about the declared value is that it is the cost to make your product. I just want to be really clear here that the tariff is not based on the retail price of your product, which is where some people have a misunderstanding. Still, it does add up to real money, which we will talk about, but it is based off of the declared value on the commercial invoice. All right. So how do they work? So really quickly, or really simple math here. Let's say it costs you $10 to produce your product. And currently, if you're coming in from China, there's 145% tariff on that cost. Then there's going to be a $14.50 tariff. Yeah, and that is a lot of money. I know. And don't go throwing your idea in the trash just yet. I know some people are like, wow, okay, I'm out. If that's going to be over double my costs, how is this even going to work? Let's talk about what you can do really quick. So I want to stress that this might sound impossible. 245%.
Only on specific product categories.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that extra 100 is from stuff that's left over from a few years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, did this just come out right before we did this
No.
webinar, which wouldn't have surprised me?
You could have. Yeah.
Exactly. It's going to happen in the middle of it. So I want to stress here that the first choice should not be to raise prices, which might sound impossible to not be able to do, but I just want you to think about it in that frame of mind. And when I say don't raise prices, I mean both trying not to raise your retail price or trying to charge an extra tariff fee to the backer, which can happen at a later point. So that is like the frame of mind that we're going to approach this framework with. And so to figure out what to do, I'm going to walk you through this framework, all right? So the framework, there's 3 steps. First, we need to think about your retail costs. 2, we need to calculate your target gross margin. And then 3, we need to calculate your cost of goods sold, like what it costs to make one unit. All right, so let's start with the first one. So typically, this is a little bit of oversimplification, but a lot of people think about retail, how to actually get your retail price. You would look at 5 to 7 times whatever your landed cost is. Landed cost is the cost to get one unit to your fulfillment center. The issue with this, if you're thinking about it this way, is that freight costs can fluctuate. So I actually recommend making it on your cost to produce. And I got this tip from Dusty. And that's because freight can fluctuate, wildly. If you just look, this is the Drury World Container Index, which tracks the price of a 40-foot container across the entire world and puts it into one index. Basically looking at this is the past year, how it's been fluctuating. So it's down over 50% from its peak right around here, where in the past year, the cost of a container is at its lowest point. Now, the point of when I'm looking at this, or the point of showing you this, is that how can you base your retail cost off of something that fluctuates so wildly? Because that's going to, especially if you're doing a 5 to 7 times multiplier, that's going to change your retail price a lot. So because of that, that's why we don't recommend that you basically charge your retail cost or do your multiplier off of the landed costs. Now that same logic applies to tariffs. This is the point. The same logic applies to tariffs. If you have, going from a 10% tariff to 145%, some goods maybe 245%, how are you going to base your retail costs off of that? It's something that's fluctuating really wildly. So basing your retail cost off of something more stable, like the cost to produce, makes more sense. All right. And so, for example, let's just say that your cost of your product was $10 to produce. If you had a 7 times multiplier, that would be a $70 retail cost. All right. Again, this seems really basic, but we're going to build on top of this logic. Okay. So, second, let's go to choosing your target gross margin. So your gross margin, think of that. This is how much money you have left over after selling one product. So you take your retail price minus the cost of goods sold, and that is your gross margin. All right. Or your gross profit. Most creators will choose a target gross margin of between 40 to 50%. The reason why is that if you have 40 to 50% gross profit, like the money left over after you sell one unit, that should be enough to pay for the other fixed business expenses you have and also to support yourselves as a business. So just as an example, Dusty, if you even want to speak to this, I know you have a target gross margin on your game of 40%, right?
And that's by sales channel and by deal. So I look at a 40% gross margin also on wholesale. So if I'm doing wholesale deals and and I'm selling at 60% off, that makes my price, or my, not my wholesale, but my distribution price, $24. And I'm also looking for a 40% margin there. So 40% just guides every sale I make. I need that percentage of it to run my business, to be able to feed my kids, et cetera, et cetera. One thing I want to stress here is that because I use 40%, that doesn't mean that your number needs to be 40% or 50%. If you decide that your number has to be 70% or 10%, all this math still applies. That 40% is based on just what we need to run our business and pay our bills.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if we're doing a Shopify sale, like full D2C, and we want a 40% margin, then we want to make $24 on that sale. If we're doing a $24 distribution deal and we're looking for a 40% margin, then we want to make $9.60.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah. And I Dusty pointed this out that your target gross margin might be a little bit different. I will say if you're having an issue kind of figuring out what that might be, I would say in general, we see it being somewhere between 40 to 50% if you're trying to come up with, some initial math. All right.
Almost everyone I know does 40 to 50%.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not the word of God. Like, you can do whatever margin makes the best sense for your business.
Yep. Yeah. All right. So the last part, so calculating your cost of goods sold. So cost of goods sold, so how much it costs to actually produce one unit. This is some of the things I'm listing here and some typical cost of goods sold. An accountant wouldn't put these in here, but I would put these in here. So things like your manufacturing costs, freight, last mile shipping, payment processing, platform fees, advertising, so like the cost to acquire a customer. Also, we would now put in tariffs into this. So putting in whatever the cost of your tariff, I would put that into your cost of goods sold to try to figure out if you're still meeting that target gross margin threshold that you put. All right. So just as a purely illustrative example, let's say that you were a business, still keeping it within the example that we were saying. You had $10 cost to produce. Let's say it costs you $2 in freight. Let's say you passed on the last mile shipping cost to your backer, so it didn't cost you anything. You had payment processing, platform fee, and it cost you about 25% of each sale that went to advertising. Then your total cost of goods sold in this example, and this is leaving off some different things, it's just keeping it simple, is $35. So now let's add your tariffs to the cost of goods sold. So let's say, again, your cost to produce a one unit is $10, 145% tariff would be $14.50. So if we add that tariff to the COGS, then we would get $35 plus $14.50, which would be $49.50. I know there's a lot of numbers being thrown out here. This is going to make sense all in a moment. So if you had, in this example, a retail price of $70, target gross margin of 40%, then we'd have a target cost of $42. But because we have the cost of goods sold at $49.50 with the tariffs added on, then that would put us above this threshold, meaning that we have to do something. So I just went through this long example that led to us having to do something when I said the goal is not to raise prices, right? So why did I do that? Because a lot of people are going to end up in this situation where they're going to have to do something with a tariff at 145%, because tariffs might go down in the future in general. And I think it's just a good way of thinking about what you should do. So let's talk about what are the options in terms of what you can do. So I really view there being three main levers that you can pull. So the first lever is that you can audit all of your costs. This might sound like really self-explanatory, but I feel like tariffs is kind of a forcing function to really make us critically evaluate every cost in the business. Second is charging for tariffs after the campaign. And third is raising your retail price. All right, you'll notice I put that last. So auditing all of your costs, just really quick, some tips. Working with your manufacturers, see if you can cut costs by using any different materials. Asking your manufacturer if they're opening locations outside of China. There are already manufacturers that have been doing this. They did this in anticipation of the tariffs coming. So asking your manufacturer if that is happening. At the same time, I understand that it sounds like a little bit oversimplistic strategy with some, but it is worth exploring that option. Trying to cut weight by using lighter materials, thinking through like all the ROI on every marketing decision you make. And again, you should be doing all these things anyways, but this is just a moment in time when you should really, really focus on this. Some specific things that I would really think about is any marketing decision where it's difficult for you to really track. It's hard for you to attribute the return on investment to that marketing decision. So some things might be like conventions or cons, paying
Content
certain,
creation is a tough
yeah,
one to follow through on.
yeah, content creators sometimes can be difficult to really track the attribution. Spending on advertising outside of Facebook and Instagram can be very difficult. So just really thinking through all those decisions, potentially investing more in education. I mean, like you're being on this call is an example of you investing in education, spending your time on that and doing some of the things yourselves, or with guided support. Second, charging for tariffs after the campaign. So this is likely what I think most people are going to be doing. So tariffs are a tax, right? So consumers are already used to paying extra for shipping, state taxes, and VAT. And speaking of that, so remember that pretty much most non-US backers are already paying this, even though and even though it's based on the sale price. So really key differentiator here. It's based on the sale price, not the cost to produce the unit. So a lot of people, when they're paying VAT, are paying more than what the tariffs would even be at 145%, and they're still backing projects. So I feel like this is a bit of like a case study of what backer behavior is if they have to charge an extra fee that could be quite high, even post crowdfunding. All right. And then lastly, raising your retail price. I would just be very cautious to do this. This is an option. This is definitely an option. I know people are already thinking about doing this. It is very difficult to decrease your retail price, especially if you sell to retailers or wholesalers, distributors, and then they lock in that price, then to go back down in the future if tariffs come down. So this is, again, related to all the math that we did at the beginning and thinking about the multiplier. If you're a business that's just complete direct to consumer and everything is through your own channels, changing your retail price or going back down is a little bit easier, I will say, than if you have these retailers, distributors, wholesale relationships. I don't know, Dusty, if you have anything else to say on that.
Yeah, so D2C is simple. You could change your price every 10 minutes if you wanted to. And while you might get some emails from customers being like, "Why is the price constantly changing?" It doesn't really affect you or your relationships with your wholesalers. The moment you raise your retail price and then you go to a wholesaler and you say, "Hey, I will offer this to you wholesale for 50% off based on a $70 MSRP, and your MSRP used to be 60." They buy that from you at $35. Then when you go later and you lower your price tag down to $60 because tariffs are smaller or gone, now you've got a retailer out in the world who paid $35 for a product they thought they were going to sell for 70, and you're telling the world that product is only worth $60. It's almost impossible to go backward from this without absolutely alienating and ruining your relationships with all your wholesalers and retailers. The only way to fix it well, and this is not a good fix actually, so let me take the word well off of there, is to offer credit or offer to give refunds to all your wholesalers and retailers. So once you go that way, if you change your price to $70 and you sell wholesale or retail, effectively it is now a $70 product for the rest of the product's life cycle.
Yeah, well said. All right, we're gonna keep going. So you might be thinking or feeling like this. You're like, you know what? This is actually a lot of information. I'm actually just gonna chill for a little bit and let this thing all blow over, which I totally understand that feeling, by the way. We can all be like Homer. But there are 5 reasons I want to go through really quickly. I've been thinking about this a lot over the past few weeks. Like if you are there was a lot of people that were in the pre-launch that might be thinking, hey, I want to put this on hold. But I do think there are some reasons that actually decrease the risk to keep going forward with the launch right now. And I'm going to go through them really quickly. The first is that you're not going to ship for a really long time. Second, advertising costs are going down. Third, freight costs are going down that I already talked about are at 12-month lows. 4, backers are still backing campaigns. And 5, Kickstarter reaches a global market. So really quickly, you're not going to ship for a long time. This might be self-explanatory, but I'm going to say it. If you're starting today, you're probably not going to ship for at least 6 to 12 months. And if you're going to be passing the tariff cost onto the backer, if that's the option that you're choosing, then you're not going to charge that fee until right before you ship. So this gives you a lot of options as well. I think that one of the most valuable resources right now in this climate is time, and crowdfunding gives you time for things to settle a bit while still allowing you to get cash flow for your business through doing a pre-order. And then tools are coming out. So I think the backer kit team might be on here. They said they might join, but if you don't know backer kit, they're awesome. Go check them out. Crowdfunding platform and also pledge manager. But they're building tools to help collect tariffs easy in the post campaign. So if you guys are here, I think that you put in the chat. Feel free to share your information as well and all that. What's up, Alex? So anyways, they're creating some tools, and I think they're going to be announcing that soon. So anyways, that's coming out, and I'm pretty sure the other crowdfunding platforms are doing this as well. Second, advertising costs are going down. So this one is very interesting. So advertising budgets are being cut. I mean, you have big companies that are going into risk management mode. What that means is that they're cutting budgets. Advertising is one of them. Less advertisers equals less competition. Less competition equals cheaper ads. That is like a little bit of an oversimplification, but it's basically the main way that ads work. It's, supply and demand. If there's a lot of demand, a lot of people spending money on ads, it's going to be more expensive. And we're already seeing this on our campaign. So we track all the aggregate metrics in terms of the cost CPM, or the cost per 1,000 impressions, to show your ad. And that has been going down. So across 336 unique projects, the CPM, or the cost per 1,000 impressions, so the cost to show your ad to 1,000 times in April, is currently 30% lower than March. So it makes sense because people are already starting to pull back budgets because of the fear and uncertainty in the market. And so you can just even see it visualized as a nice downtrend. This is very good. This is an opportunity to have advertising be cheaper. Freight costs are at 12-month lows. I already spoke about this before, but Justin, maybe if you want to add a little bit, do we think freight costs are going to stay low or potentially go lower? Like, what are some of the mechanisms that might affect that?
Yeah, just so to compare, I mean, we're at levels where basically like pre-COVID, 2018, 2019, there was after the COVID surge, we did hit rates similar to where we're at now, maybe in like 2003. But yeah, we're kind of at all-time lows right now in the last 10 years or so. And it seems like that trend is going to continue because, let's face it, a lot of people are gun shy. There's also a lot of overcapacity in terms of the carriers. A lot of new vessels have been built over the last few years, stemming from COVID and such. If the Red Sea crisis goes away and we can start to use the Suez Canal again, that again will open up more capacity. And so that all translates to lower rates in general, lower demand, more space. Now the carriers will start to play games to offset all that. They will pull boats and voyages from the sales schedules. We call them blank sailings. If they are, say, in Shanghai, they see that a boat next week is only looking half full, they'll pull it from the system and they'll roll our cargo out to the next sailing. So, but yeah, I think the way everything is right now, we're going to see these low rates continue. Peak season is around the corner. That usually starts to ramp up in July and June. But again, everything is pointing to a soft season, a soft market.
Yeah. I think that the main thing here is that if there are people that are gun shy for good reason, then that ultimately leads to, let's say, less competition in the market, what are the downstream effects of less competition in the market, which could be an actual opportunity for creators that are moving forward. So that's freight is one of the things to look at. Now, next, are backers still backing campaigns? I was like, okay, all this is great, but if people aren't backing projects, does any of this matter? Now, I will preface this by saying we're kind of only like 2.5 weeks into the most of the craziness. But from what we're seeing so far, I spoke with Alex at BackerKit and Konstantinos Manos from tabletopanalytics.com, tracks all the data on tabletop. And basically, the moral of the story is that right now, so far, we haven't seen a notable decrease in conversion rate on campaigns since the tariffs were announced. This is something that we'll keep looking at. But I think the main thing here is that this is another reason why you should be careful about raising your retail costs, is that if retail costs all of a sudden start going up a lot on the front end on campaigns, I anticipate, this is my opinion, I would anticipate that, yes, there will be a decrease in conversion rate on the campaigns. But what I think is just like how we see with charging extra for shipping, charging extra for tax, charging extra for VAT, that if that's communicated properly on the campaign, that there might be an extra fee for US backers, 6 to 12 months from now, and we're going to push it out as much as possible, that there won't be any big notable difference in terms of the conversion rate on the campaigns. That is my prediction, and what we're seeing in the past 2 weeks, even amongst all the craziness, is that seems to be true right now. And then lastly, Kickstarter reaches a global market. Sometimes I forget this, but it's like, I'm living in my bubble in the US. But the US is a huge market, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not the whole market. And Kickstarter does reach that global market. So typically you're seeing 30 to 50% of the funding on these projects coming from countries outside of the US. Just 2 quick examples. We have a tech product right now that we help launch. Go down to the bottom number, 53% of the backers are from outside the US. It's raised $300,000 so far. Seabeast, Aaron, his project, awesome project. Almost, I guess 39% of the backers are from outside the US. It's really small for you, I think. I can't even see on my screen. 600,000.
Yeah,
that was
we
raised.
Exactly that. Same as Aaron on artistry as well at 40% outside the US.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's in everyone, you can go look at this. It's really interesting. If you didn't know this, you can go on Kickstarter, click on the community tab and see the breakdown of backers, the top 10 countries where they're coming from. And then you could just do the math yourself if you want to validate yourself. But this is really interesting to think about, right? Because it's like all the numbers sometimes people are looking at their costs based off of just US, when that's not going to represent the entire market. And so that's definitely going to change your numbers. All right. So hopefully through this short presentation, you're feeling a little bit more like this guy. You can do this. All right. And we have more resources as well. If you want to take out your phone, scan that. Many of you on here might have already seen some of the guides that we posted. Basically, the guides that we have in this resources section are like more in depth than what I just went through. So if you want to check that out, and we're going to keep adding to that, we're going to keep having webinars like this as well. So more to come. But I'm sure what everyone is waiting for now are questions, Q&A that we can get into right now. And we're going to try to get to as many as possible. If you can use the Q&A function, that would be great, everyone. So people are already starting to do this. All right. I'm going to try to read through this. All right, Eric, I see your all your questions. I am going to get to that. I have to read through a lot of them though. So let me start with another one. Well, I don't know. Let's see if does see if you have any answer to this. Are non-US backers declining because of anti-American sentiment? I mean, you talked about what you've seen.
No, they still want the products. They still buy. I think the media likes to play up. Somebody said to me the other day that Americans aren't the biggest fan of Canadians, and meanwhile, I was literally chatting with one of my friends in Canada, like everything was normal. Like whatever the people confuse politics with real life. Whatever the politicians are doing doesn't have a lot of direct effect on consumer sentiment, desire to buy a product, friendships. Like that's all still totally fine and normal.
marginal at best then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, so the last day of artistry was the day that all this went into effect and that the stock market took a nice little, correction and the whole 9 yards. I wouldn't even call it a plunge. Like, correction is the correct term for what happened to the stock market. And we still had like one of the best days of our 3 campaigns. It was second only to botany and then barely. Like, we had a great final day despite the world, having its hair on fire.
Nice.
all right. Camille asks, has U.S. Customs established any precedent for crowdfunded imports under new tariffs while manufacturing invoices should technically determine transaction value? Are you aware of cases where customs officials have instead fixated on the higher Kickstarter pledge amounts or retail prices when valuing these shipments? What's the real world risk of this happening despite the legal framework? Here's that question. I think this might be, if I'm understanding the question, it might be confusing that how the tariffs are being calculated. Is that what you guys are getting from this?
The short answer is no.
Yeah, I think oh, go ahead, Justin. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, customs, a government body, obviously will take time and stuff. The whole Kickstarter thing has been a problem for years, right? Is because the argument is, well, it's not, I didn't pay for it. I donated to help the project. And so, yeah, that mark, it's really going to be whatever the factory puts on the commercial invoice. That's what you're going to pay the tariffs on.
Yeah.
And one thing I've seen a lot of people, especially in the beginning, it's getting better now, but a lot of people are confused about the idea of the declared value. The declared value is not what you declare the value of your product is. Like, I declare my value is worth my product is worth $60 on wholesale or on retail and $40 on Kickstarter. Like Justin said, the government cares about, governmental things, and that governmental thing is what is written on the invoice.
Yeah, what you paid. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Justin.
Oh, just one other point, and this was in your presentation too, Mark, but I just wanted to add, because this question comes up a lot, is are the tariffs on the cost of freight? And I think Europeans get a little confused in that, because actually in Europe, when you import, if the terms are Ex Works or FOB, you would pay any duties, taxes, and tariffs on the freight charges. That's not the case in the US. So just wanted to point that out.
That's a really good point. All right. So Eric has a pretty long question. We're going to kind of break this down and probably come back to certain things. So if I were to use a USA injection molding manufacturing as per the Trump initiative, would my UK company incur taxes in the US, only in the UK, or both? I don't know if you guys, yeah, I don't think you would.
When it comes to tariffs, it's only a matter of it going through customs and border protection, right, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, is he talking about selling US made product to the UK? I mean, that would depend on whether the UK has a tariff on us for US manufactured goods.
Yeah.
Which is not the case.
But if you make it in the US and you sell it in the US, no, there's no tariff. I mean, you might be subject to other like sales tax and whatnot, depending on your sales volume, but otherwise, no.
Right.
Yeah. I know, Eric, I asked you to ask all these. Some of these I will get back to you on, thinking through, because some of them aren't really related to tariffs. I guess, like, what would the declared value be? Maybe if this could actually branch off to some other questions I think people have as well, which is like, I know I said it's the cost to produce the product, and Justin, you just said, the freight is not on the commercial invoice either. I know there are also some people that are looking for ways to kind of figure out like what they can put on that declared invoice. Can I, maybe have it only be on the unit cost, whatever it might be. But like, what is, typically when you say declared value, the things that go on the invoice that are going to be tariffed?
I mean, that it's just your manufacturer agreement. It's what you agreed to pay the factory as a cost per unit. Now, there's obviously some gray area on some, there might be setup costs. Let's say your game requires a mold to be made specifically to make plastic figurines or whatever it might be. Generally speaking, the factory is not going to include that in your cost per unit. There's other things too, like if the factory has sales reps that are scattered all over the world or whatever, they could potentially, this is a discussion to have with them. You could partition that away and that be a separate invoice, admin fees and such like that. I mean, that's become a huge hot topic in the last month or so just because of the tariffs, whereas before it just didn't matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's worth talking to your factory about I mean, again, it's a fine line. You don't want to do anything illegal, but what can you do? What can we discuss to help my commercial invoice value to be the lowest? Because that is what gets reported to customs.
Yeah.
And I should add that, like, so if you were importing a game, let's say you did a few print runs, you had 3 print runs and you imported under $5 a game, and now all of a sudden your game is $3 per game, that's going to be fishy to customs. If they ever did an audit on you up to 5 years later, that could be a problem for you. So again, use your discretion, be smart about it. But if it's within the rules, then go for it.
Yeah. All right. Is there a time limit for paying tariffs? What if they go down after you pay?
So tariffs, duties, and taxes have to be paid immediately at the time of entry. And that might be us, the freight forwarder, or the broker is fronting it for whoever the importer is. That's typically the case. We've had to change our own policies because this is a massive cash flow issue. I mean, we're literally outlaying millions of dollars more per week just with all the tariffs. And we're only at the 20% mark now, right? Like all the boats that left after April 9th haven't even hit, even the West Coast. So what we're doing, there's a couple ways that we're asking people to pay tariffs. You can actually, the importer can open an ACH with customs so that when we do the entry, it comes directly out of their bank account. We like that, again, because that helps us with the cash flow. It's done quickly. Another way is that we can ask the importer to prepay. So again, the pre-alert comes out, it's departed, origin, wherever, and we now have the commercial invoice on hand, so we can calculate what the duties, taxes, and tariffs would be. And, you know, as it's coming halfway across the Pacific Ocean, we can say, hey, here's what the tariffs are going to be. Can you please prepay this now? And then we wouldn't do an outlay fee or you know, extra charges on it. And then the third option is, yeah, we can front it for you once it gets here in the States, but we're going to charge, I think right now we have a 2.5% outlay fee if we have to front the tariffs.
You know, Justin,
Which
can
I
you
don't,
also speak to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as a salesperson, I don't really like that, but I totally get the accounting of it. I mean, it's like hindering our business greatly that we have to outlay all this cash, let alone deal with all the AR issues. Sorry, Dusty, go ahead.
I was gonna say, can you also speak to the fact that the tariff is based on the date your boat sails? Because I've had people that I've been talking to who are freaking out. They're like, well, my ship's been on the water for 3 weeks and now I have this 145% tariff. And I'm like, but you don't. You have the 20% tariff that you sailed under. They, you know, it's not like, well, how can I possibly ship a thing if I don't, you know, if it leaves the port and then the tariff changes? I'm like, no, you're fine. But if I understand correctly too, it does work backwards, where if it's 145% and then your boat lands, they're not going to charge, and then they change it lower. They're not going to tell you sailed 6 weeks ago and charge you that higher rate, right?
Yeah, it's a great point, Dustin. I've seen a lot of that too. And it's confusing because it's actually changed. You know, when the tariffs first came out on China, it was the boat had to leave before February 1st, and then you actually had to clear customs before March 6th. This time around, it's just if you've departed after the 5th or the 9th, the new tariff that's in place is in effect. So if you left before then, yes, you're going to get hit with the 20%. And yeah, the same thing. I've had customers that thought that they were going to get hit with this new tariff, and then I tell them that, and they're like, "Oh, I just did the happy dance, knowing that it's only 20%." So,
I mean, could that also be true if the boat sails and that goes down? Like the tariffs go down while it's on the water?
They could do something retroactively. And yeah, actually, that's a fault. If it went up higher, I guess it could go the other way too. That's the crappy part about all of this is like we have this uncertainty, and I completely am compassionate and understand why people are hesitant just because of that. It's like, well, Trump could go out on Truth Social and put something else, and now instead of 145, I got to deal with 175. You know, but I'm hopeful again as some time goes by, maybe another week or whatever, if we stay where we are and there becomes this understanding that allows us to make better decisions because at least we know what we're dealing with.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So someone asks, okay, if I'm based in Canada, my fulfillment is in Canada, and I ship to my U.S. customers from there, when does the tariff kick in exactly? It will when it comes in to the U.S., correct?
Exactly, when it crosses the border. Yeah.
So basically,
from Canada, they're going to pay on the full price that they paid, not on your freight price, right, Justin?
Yeah, so this is a little tricky because again, I'm in the business of freight forwarding and again, bulk cargo moving. Courier service, I think, is what they're talking about. Like if it's being fulfilled from a Canadian fulfillment center and going to the end user in the US, it should be based on whatever the sell is. Because again, that person is not putting on the commercial invoice the value, what they paid to the factory. They're putting their sell rate to whoever it's going to. So the tariff should apply to that sell price.
So trying to ship right now, my takeaway from everything I've read is that trying to ship into the US, the direct to consumer is actually worse than freighting into the US because the consumer will be charged, especially if it's de minimis based on what's everything's going on with that as of May 2nd. But the consumer will be charged the price they paid as a I'm sorry, the tariff will be assessed against the price they paid, not against the price that's on your commercial invoice. And I also highly recommend not going to your consumers and telling them what you paid per unit, because not a single consumer on the planet who has never manufactured anything understands how that goes up the chain into your cost. They're just going to say, what do you mean you charge me one, you paid 1/7 of what you charged me?
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, Dusty. And yes, you are correct that as of right now, it would make more sense to just get it to your US fulfillment. And that way and if you had it in Canada and you're basically just doing an inventory transfer. So you still own the cargo, the product. And then once you sell it, it's already in the US. So then you would pay, I'm sorry, once it crossed Canada to your US fulfillment, you're obviously paying on the manufacturing costs.
So in this case, what it sounds like, if they're based in Canada, they were planning on fulfilling from Canada, the recommendation is actually to have a fulfillment center in the US because it might actually save them money. Is that what you're recommending on this case specifically?
So yes, if you're saying so, if you did have it in Canada and you needed to get cargo to fulfill to U.S. backers or whatever, you would do it in a bulk shipment and do an inventory transfer. So then again, you're doing the declaration into U.S. commerce at your cost that you paid the factory.
Got it.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, long term, like the plan going forward is you can keep stuff in Canada in hopes that once this goes down, now you can capitalize on that. You're a couple days drive to get it into the US. That's an angle that a lot of people are looking at right now.
Well, that's a good segue into the next question, which is, are there any hacks to lower tariffs, like forwarding your product to another country with lower tariffs and then importing?
It's not a hack, but it gives you more flexibility. The way Justin described it to me is that, so we're kind of like looking at moving our product to Canada because at least we get it nearby and we can react quickly if things change. Once the floodgates open in China, and I mean, let's assume that that's years from now. The moment the floodgates open, everybody on the planet is going to be trying to ship their stuff from China to the US, and the prices are going to be ridiculous. And as Justin put it to me, you will be fighting for space on a boat, right? And that's not a good scenario to be in if you have a window of 90-day pause or whatever you're trying to work against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's downsides and upsides to both, right? If you store it in China, the storage charges are probably going to be way cheaper. Not only that, you could probably negotiate with your factory for a little bit of help there, compared to Canadian storage, which is probably going to be a little bit more. But again, like what you said too, Mark, as well as you, Dusty, is that right now freight rates are down. So if you in theory, sent stuff to Canada now, your freight rates are going to be low. And then later on, not only are you going to pay more, but again, trying to get back on track with China opening the floodgates could be tough. All tough decisions to make, but
another tough decision is, should we look at manufacturing elsewhere? Dusty, I don't know. What do you think about? Yeah, sorry, go Dusty.
It all comes down to math. If you want to manufacture in Europe, it's generally up to twice the cost of what it costs in China. And right now at 145% tariff, 200% the cost is better than 245% the cost. If that changes, you got manufacturing lead time. And if China and the US work something out and the tariff goes down, well, now you get a little more trouble. The other part of the problem you're going to run into there is what are you manufacturing? If you're making a massively miniature heavy game, the options for manufacturing miniatures or anything with plastics are less in Europe than you would have available to yourself in China. And so you could have increased lead times. You could have problems just sourcing. You could find that maybe that portion of the cost is is a higher than a factor of 200%, like the paper printing would be. It all just comes down to math and risk aversion. If you do your math correctly, you can make just about anything work well, especially if you have time to plan ahead. Now, if you're printing in Europe, like, okay, let's say you decide to print in China. What are the odds that we're going to have a problem with China 6, 12, 24 months from now? I would say they're drastically higher than the odds that we're going to have a problem with Poland or the Czech Republic 6, 12, or 24 months from now, right? And so then you're factoring in, it's sort of like an insurance policy. You're factoring in that increased cost for increased stability. Also attractive to me. Same for how we're looking at moving stock to Canada. Maybe it costs me a little more in the long run, but that's an insurance policy that means I could drive to Canada and get my stuff if I had to, which I prefer security on some levels over making sure that I have the lowest cost possible.
Yeah, all that's going to take a lot of time, right? I mean, the Chinese really have a grip on a lot of industries, including the gaming industry, where they just do it really well. They've got the expertise, they've got the machinery. There's lots of options within China, and until that spills over into Europe, Southeast Asia, places like that, we're kind of stuck with what we have.
And realistically, if you're a U.S. based manufacturer, that being able to manufacture in U.S. would be the best possible outcome for you, because you're not dealing with exchange rates. You're dealing with even just cross cultural stuff where when you say something to somebody in U.S. English who speaks U.S. English, there is a lesser likelihood that is going to get lost in translation somewhere. You can go and actually see the factory more easily. You can get your product more easily. You don't have to pay tariffs, and you're not subject to geopolitics like we currently are. However, to manufacture a copy of Botany costs 330% what it costs to manufacture in China. And so obviously that's a massive barrier to me being able to manufacture in the US unless I want a copy of Botany to cost $165.
Do y'all know this? Like, are tariffs going to be applied to like print materials, TTRPG rule books, for example? I've heard differing opinions on this, I guess. I don't know, Justin, if you know, or either of you know.
Yes, this has come up quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, and I can give you my take on it and what I've experienced with my brokerage team and what they've gotten in speaking and reaching out to customs on this. So there is an exemption for books. The exemption, as we've determined it to be, is for informational reading. And obviously that's open to interpretation, but role-playing game books are considered a game, not a reading book. So for that, I've pushed back hard on this too with my brokerage team, and I basically just got shot down and was just like, it's not a reading book, it's a game. So the functionality of it, again, and I can relate, like there is a gray area. I was speaking to someone yesterday about like, well, what if there's a book about how to play the role-playing game? And to me, that would be different because that's an informational book. You're reading it to gain information. And so that might fall under the exemption. Another example, a customer of mine had graphic novels, and it was determined that that was it matched up nicely to the exemption because, again, you were reading the book. So unfortunately, right now, role-playing game books do not fall under the exemption, in our opinion, and that's our interpretation, again, based on what we talked with customs. Will other brokers be willing to file it under that exemption? Maybe, but there's ramifications if they're wrong too. So we have to be very careful about what we do as a licensed broker. Customs can penalize us. If we lost our license, our business is ruined. So we have to be very careful. And it's also worth mentioning that a broker is just a guide to, navigating customs codes and regulations. If you really want to get into the nitty gritty of it, you either have to hire an import lawyer to get rulings on such, or reach out to customs directly for a certain ruling on a certain product.
And from a business perspective,
answer,
yeah, I was going to say, if you don't have a hard yes that you are exempt, you need to plan as though the answer is a hard no, because you don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know you don't know who you're going to be speaking to at customs. If you've ever tried to build anything in the United States and you've had a building inspector come over, or you try to get your driver's license when you're 16, there is absolutely a massive amount of like, how good is this guy's day been, and who else did he have to deal with before me, that is going to determine what the answer is for you on that. And so your buddy, if it's not a hard yes, and your buddy gets a book through, a TTRPG book through at 0%, don't assume that the same thing is going to happen to you unless you have it written in absolute stone that the answer is no.
That's right. And I would love to be on that side. In fact, in talking to some customers that are getting opinions from other places, and I'm just like, show me where it is. Because if we have the proof that we can use that exemption, we'll be all on board for it. But until that comes along, we're kind of stuck.
So we have someone that launched their Kickstarter campaign 9 months ago, was funded. They said their initial order went from 40,000 to 100,000. Don't have the funds to cover that cost. Made the Kickstarter launch very unprofitable. The question is, would you wait until tariffs pass to fulfill, or try to collect more funds from backers before placing the order? Dusty, how would you think about this as a creator yourself?
So if I was in a position where it had to be, I think what I would do, and I have not had to do this before, but I have talked to people who have. Okay, here, let me give a little backstory. So Amy and I have a wedding photography business. Luckily, we've been able to kind of hibernate that because the board games are going so well, but you never know. We might turn it back on. We would have brides who would give us 2 hours to shoot, and then they would be 2 hours late for their shoot. And then we would have 2 minutes to shoot. And I would go to them and I would say, well, here are your options. You have 2 minutes. Which would you prefer? And rather than telling them what they had to do, giving them the choice solved all problems. And so in this case, what I would do is I would go to my backers and say, hey guys, here's where we're at. The tariffs are more than we have the cash to pay currently. So I have a couple options for you. And I wouldn't try to, get political and do all this stuff, because politics is where businesses go to die. And I would say to my backers, you can either pay a $7 tariff fee or whatever your tariff fee needs to be, and we can deliver to you now. Or if you would prefer not to pay the tariff fee, then we can ship to you once tariffs have passed, and that is an option available to you. And it's going to be a lot of administrative work for you to sort all that out, but you're putting it on the backer and saying, which would you prefer? If you don't mind waiting, no tariff fee. If you'd like it to ship now, we unfortunately have to charge a tariff fee. Let us know, and we'll make sure you get your game. We're happy to facilitate. And I've talked to people who have had to do that on similar things like the shipping crisis or whatever. And that has gone immeasurably better than just going and saying 100% of you must pay tariff fee. I'm holding hostage. You cannot have your product until you do.
Great answer. I can only imagine how challenging that is for the person that asked that. So, but I think it's a really
it's maximum level challenge. Yeah. It doesn't get any harder than that. I guess your container could fall off a boat and that would be harder. But otherwise, yeah, it's as hard as it gets.
Yeah.
Well, like you were saying, Mark, he's got time on his side too, and hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does seem like in this situation that it's already 9 months past when the campaign ended. So, you might be running up on that time a little bit. Yeah, no. But
I missed that part.
No. It's all good.
If the game is ready, there's no reason to deny people access to it if they're willing to pay that. Because tariffs on a copy of Artistry, which we just sold, are $6.69. That's a lot across 8,000 backers, but the individual $6.69 itself, for most people, is not going to make or break their day. Right? It's annoying, but it is feasible to pay. It's not like you're looking at like $1,000 per backer, which would be impossible.
Okay, so this person's having issue. They don't feel like they have a clear HTS code. The question is, has anyone else in the community gone through this? Has anyone contacted customs to determine what the HTS code for your product will be? Or Justin, maybe if you speak to how you determine what the HTS code is for your product.
Can we ask them what the product is? Did they list that?
They did not. Maybe if you want to put that in chat, if you feel comfortable, and we could help.
Yeah. So generally, this has come up quite a bit, especially Kickstarter. Where there's a unique product that doesn't really fit into a code. And again, so what we would do is, I would usually fish out what the description is. What is it used for? What is it made out of? Where is it coming from? And then I would send that over to the brokerage team. And then they would look at it and compare it to the codes, and based on that information, they might come back with a couple more questions, but we usually can get to a code that makes sense. And if we really don't know, then again, we would defer to a lawyer or someone that could.
Can we install semiconductors in all our board games so we can get that temporary exemption?
Yeah, that's the hack. All right. That was a joke, everyone. All right. So, okay, so next one. Okay.
It was absolutely a joke. Do not do that for real.
Don't do
Yes.
that. Yeah. Does DDP truly include all cost except for freight? Justin.
Yeah, so the term DDP, and again, so shipping terms or Incoterms, they were created back in the 80s and 90s as an understanding between buyer and seller about like, okay, well, who's responsible for what? And they often get butchered and morphed a lot of ways. But DDP stands for delivery duty paid. And what that means is that the shipper, the exporter, is taking care of and paying for all freight charges door to door, including customs on both ends. So they're hiring someone like us, a freight forwarder, to make those arrangements, but they are liable and they are in control door to door DDP. The opposite of that is X work. So you'll see EXW. And that just means that the buyer, the consignee, is paying for all charges door to door as well. So again, they would hire a freight forwarder to do the whole leg of the journey. There are others you'll see like FOB, free on board. That just means that the factory at origin is paying for all origin charges, which are basically your trucking charges, terminal and port charges, and then I would call it like documentation fees. And the same thing actually happens on the destination side.
If anybody needs help with those terms, I can't remember them. So DDP is done, paid. FOB is throw it on the boat. And EXW is exactly where the factory is.
Perfect.
Awesome. I'm gonna add that to the guide. That's great.
Yep.
All right. That's awesome. Okay, this is a good one from Ryan. We're sourcing paddles from China, but repackaging and bundling them with UK-made apparel and accessories before shipping to US backers. With Trump's new tariffs, will US Customs accept our manufacturing invoice value, or is there a real risk they'll base duties on our Kickstarter pledge prices? How do we mitigate that risk and ensure correct classification and valuation?
Yeah, that one's really tricky. So there might be two different charges, right? Like if the paddles are, especially if you sent the paddles separately, then there's no doubt. But if it's all together, my feeling is that it'll get itemized and you'll have to pay the Chinese tariffs on the paddles, and then anything else that was made and comes with the product from the UK would be as that, which is I don't think a tariff right now, but could be. So yes.
From a board game publisher side of things, and maybe in general, there's been a lot of talk about like Longpack is currently offering a Vietnam factory, but parts are still coming from China for that, and then they're assembling them or they're pulling parts from other places. Does customs ever? I'm like jumping the line and asking my own question here. I'm sorry, guys. Does customs ever look at it and say, well, if it's more than X percentage parts from China, we consider it of Chinese origin, even though it was assembled and put together and printed in Vietnam?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that all came out in the first round of Trump tariffs. Everyone started to send stuff to Vietnam and other Southeast Asian countries to try and bypass. I mean, a lot of people were essentially taking a product that was made in China and then sending it there and putting it in a different box, relabeling it, and then saying, "Oh, it came from Vietnam." You can't do that legally. You are supposed to alter the product a certain percentage, and forgive me that I don't know the percentage, and it could be different from commodity to commodity, but there has to be a value change. And, again, it has to be a product A from China, and now it went to Vietnam, and now it's product B. It can't resemble what it was. There's going to be a real workup to it.
So I think I would just plan to assume that it was going to be labeled as China in that scenario. Like I said before, if you don't have a hard yes, then plan as though it's a hard no and hope it's not.
So also in that, so if let's say some game pieces were made in China, let's say that's just 20%, and then the 80% of the rest of the game was made in Vietnam, and they sent the Chinese pieces to Vietnam, it was consolidated, put in the game box, and sent out all in the cartons. That actually, because all of that is under the same code as board games and accessories, would suffice to, in my opinion, just be that it all came from Vietnam. The question that was asked was, I believe, and I could be wrong, but you have paddles, that's one type of commodity. And then if you have shirts, let's say that's coming, two different commodities, two different codes. And so then the separation and the tariffs would come into play to each.
Yeah, because the apparel and accessories are UK made, and then they're being repackaged in China before shipping to the US. So I don't actually, I don't know if that means that they're being sent to China and then being repackaged there and then sent. Maybe Ryan, if you want to clarify, or if you guys understand the question, we do all the packaging in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, again, if it's all if the paddles come from China, go to the UK, and then the paddles are added to all this other product there, and then it's sent as one unit. Again, my feeling is that they'll be itemized when the entry is done, and it'll show, paddles, t-shirts, or whatever else is in there, and the applicable tariffs based on the code and the country of origin would come into effect.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't make that super clear in the presentation, but yeah, and I think a lot of people have questions about this, but that's why you can't get around it by, sending it to another country that has lower tariffs. It's the country of origin, and the HTS code, which is going to be looked at on the commercial invoice when it's going through customs. Correct? Did I say that correctly?
And that feels like that could be down to like, is it right before lunchtime for the customs assessor, or does he have a nice full belly and he's happy for the afternoon, right? And then, you hear stories about certain parts of the world where it also depends on what the guy's getting paid and how and when. That really does not happen in the United States. It is very much like down to the bureaucracy and the check boxes. But if there is a gray area, then it comes down to the sentiment of whoever is interpreting that gray area.
Yeah, there's a real human factor to it.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a hard stop right now? I mean,
no, I'm good. I'm happy to help. Yeah,
I'm good too.
You are? So we're gonna keep it going for a little bit longer, maybe about 10 minutes. Try to get through more questions. Let's keep going. Okay. Okay. This is more towards Dusty. Any recommendation how to explain to backers that tariffs could be charged later? Should we provide an estimate? What's your recommendation on that?
I think you have to be very straightforward with it. So and I don't find this to be any different from sales tax and VAT. I still get an alarmingly large number of people who are surprised that they're being charged U.S. sales tax for their order. And the United States has 13,000 tax municipalities that are charged in 48 states. Don't quote me on that because that changes every day. I just say everywhere, $39.99, $21 off MSRP, and then in parentheses plus shipping and applicable tax, right? Tax where applicable. And I just say that over and over and over again. And I would just say plus shipping, tax, and your sales tax and tariff where applicable. And then you can say a thing down below in the shipping statement that says, shipping rates in the EU, right, or VAT currently ranges from 20 to 27% or whatever it is. But but this may change on a dime. Current tariffs are 145%, or tariffs range from 20 to 145%. But this too could change. And you just have to communicate that over and over and over again to the backer. Every now and then when I get somebody that says, you never said that, I just say, here's all the details. You can click on the estimated shipping section of our campaign. And 100% of people go, oh, I missed that. Very rarely, I think I can think of maybe 2 or 3 people that really dug in and said, well, I'm not going to back your project because I didn't know I had to pay sales tax in California. And I go, okay, no problem. Would you like a refund? And they give them a refund. And then that's the end of it. Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of examples. Communicate. Yeah, there are a lot of examples. I mean, it's become very popular, and I recommend this, to not charge for shipping during the campaign, even though you can, and to charge at the latest point possible. And you can see how campaigns do this. I'm assuming, Dusty, you have something.
We charge when the boat hits the water. Yeah, we charge when we know what the cost is going to be or are pretty certain. And tariffs are also, what Justin said about the tariff is based on the sale date. There you go again. Hey, your ship has left port. Neat. I am now charging for shipping because I know what my tariff's going to be.
Yeah, and so you can have something on your campaign page that speaks to this. And I would, if you are going to charge at a later point, or you plan on that, or you think there's a possibility, which sounds like it's probably going to be in most cases, then I would recommend having something on your campaign page that speaks to this.
And here's kind of an important point to take off of that too. There are campaigns out there that are not charging tariffs, and ours is one of them included. Our backers purchased under a certain price and under a certain understanding, and we have the margin to cover, like I said, that $6 worth of tariff per order. It's going to hurt. I'm not going to be happy about it. But what I didn't want to do was come to our backers and say, hey, you're going to have to pay more. That said, do not look at campaigns like mine or other campaigns that are saying that and assume that that has to be what you do too. Because backers I've actually had backers emailing me saying we would like to pay for tariffs because they understand. And so you have to do whatever, like there is no emotion, there is only math. And whatever your math is telling you must be done, that is what you have to do. And then it just becomes a matter of communicating it correctly to the backers. So I do not fault people that are charging tariffs. I do not fault people that are not charging tariffs because everybody's math is going to be different.
Okay. Let's go. I'm getting lost in these questions. We have a whole bunch. Okay. Okay, there was a couple of questions about reducing costs. Dusty, this is for either of you actually. Any recommendations specifically on board games, these questions, like what are some of the areas that you feel like you would look at as possible places that you could potentially reduce costs without sacrificing too much? I mean, there's always going to be a sacrifice, there's going to be some give and take, but what do you look at?
Amy is on the other side of the screen telling me all kinds of ways to reduce costs because she's a pro. The way you go about advertising, let's say that you are going to advertise 4 different ways on Board Game Geek via content creators, on social media, and via meta ads. Okay, what's your conversion rate? What's your ROI on each of those? ROI on Board Game Geek depends on your product. Our product's ROI is fine, but not great because we're not targeted at Board Game Geek audience. Our content creators, super hard to track conversion there. Maybe find content creators that don't necessarily cost as much or don't cost anything at all. Instagram, if you're just doing your own social media, that's basically free. That's sweat equity. So you got time invested in that one. Meta ads, you can spend as little or as much as you want to, super high conversion rates typically, and easy to track. And so you just start cutting out the lowest ROI things you got on your plate. If you were going to spend $5,500 on a how to play video, maybe that's one of the first ones to go because you're not going to get a lot of direct conversions for that. Maybe it's time to DIY that one.
What about manufacturing? Like, what are some areas like that if they were going to assess the cost to produce their game?
I don't have a box of botany in reach. We put gold foil on the box of botany on all our boxes, and that is 10% the cost of that game. Well, maybe it's time to do without the gold foil. Now, Amy says over my dead body on that one, right? But maybe use box size. Don't add. Yeah, reduce the box size. If you got 40% air inside your box so that people can sleeve their cards, maybe that one has to go because you reduce your box size by 40%. It's basically 1-to-1. You reduce your freight cost by 40%, right? Because that more often than not, Justin can correct me, but freight is really affected by the amount of things you can fit in a container because we're not shipping lead bricks, right? And so you're never going to run into a weight issue there. If you use, you go to your factory and your factory's like, well, you were going to pay, we could reduce your cost by 20 cents if you go from ivory core to a white core. That is an option too. Do without that linen finish. Don't make your coins metal in the box. Use punch board instead. There's, Panda is especially great at this. We go to Panda and say, hey, I want the cost to be here so I can hit my multiplier. What levers can I pull? And Cardner will give me 50 levers I can pull that I can choose from.
How about this?
Oh, here's a great one under tariffs. Okay, so here's Botany, it's $60. Here's War of the Posies, it's $20. They're 2 different games. My margin under tariffs in a distribution deal is $1 higher on War of the Posies than it is on Botany at 3 times the price. So mind blower. I was just staring at this computer screen going, this cannot be, and I checked the math 8 times. Do all your math 6 ways, and you will be surprised after you start itemizing every single thing where those costs get eaten up in weird ways.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, you're hitting the nail on the head there, Dusty, with the volume. The multiplier in Ocean is either 1 metric ton or 1 cubic meter. And board games are basically, a lot of products are based on the volume. So if you shrink down the size of the game, then you can save money.
We figured out that we could reduce the box for artistry by a 1/2 inch, which was a 17 net reduction in freight cost. 17% reduction in freight costs for the life of the product. Like, that's a big one.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I just jotted down too is, like, if you can give yourself more time and you give me more time, I can generally look for ocean service that is cheaper. There's kind of a misnomer out there about the slow boat, but there are services that are, there's more stops, there are longer voyages. Basically, if you pay less, you're making your priority a little bit lower, so you can get delayed. But if you're willing to pay less so that you have a longer transit time, then that works for some people. And then the final thought I would say on keeping an eye on costs relative to shipping is try to avoid shipping out of September and January, at least out of China. September is the height of peak season. And so generally year after year, we see rates spike during that time. And again, space is very tough. And then January is because of Chinese New Year. So that I would add that too.
So we have Derek asked another question. Also, someone that finished their crowdfunding campaign July 2024, just finished production at the end of last month. Congrats on doing that, all by the way. We're currently fulfilling globally from China and trying to transition into direct-to-consumer sales as a brand. With the announcement of de minimis being removed for packages coming from China to the U.S. on May 2nd, is the best move for me to bring my bulk to the USA. We didn't accommodate for tariffs during our campaign, so the cost of bringing the USA is looking way too steep, unfortunately. On that note, do you have any thoughts or guidance on how to raise more funds post-crowdfunding outside of direct-to-consumer sales for a startup brand like us? Who wants to take that question?
Well, there's a few things there. One, without knowing your math, yes, probably the cheapest route for you is going to be to move your stuff into the US so that you're paying the tariff on the invoice cost and not on the direct cost to the consumer. It sounds like that's maybe not mathematically feasible. And so then we go back to the options that you're presenting to your customers where you're like, hey guys, here's where we're at in the timeline. Here's the problem we are facing. All the cost estimates were based on shipping to you from out of the country. And this is how much that price is going to go up. If you would like to get your product now, we can facilitate that. And there will be a charge of X dollars or X percentage based on your pledge. And if you would rather wait until things settle down and you don't mind waiting a little bit of time, then we there's a chance that we'll get back to that original cost. Again, not an easy thing to do, but when you give people the option to make that decision, then they have a much better time coming to terms with it. So,
I haven't given a lot of thought to this in terms of, let's say, direct to consumer sales on like Shopify and a Shopify store or something. But I mean, I don't know, Dusty, what you think about this, but would you also consider charging, let's say, an extra fee, just like how you do on shipping or tax,
Sure, but add it to your shipping charge. Shopify, you can already do that. Just increase all your shipping rates by $5-6 or whatever. And you don't need to stay tariff charge. And you can do it by region. So if it's shipping to the US from Shopify, instead of saying that the price was $15, say it's $21. And then then the consumer just looks and says, oh, this is coming from the UK or wherever. And I know that that's going to be expensive, and they can make that decision. Will you lose some volume? Maybe not. Hard to determine that without doing a 1-to-1 test. But you don't have to slap consumers in the face with, tariff. You can just say, yeah, it will cost $21 to ship to you. And they can say yes or no.
Okay. All right. We'll do like 2 more questions. Okay. So if 4 out of 10 of my parts are made in China and 6 out of 10 parts are made in Vietnam, my product is now assembled and shipped in from Vietnam. Is my overall tariff 46%? Or does a certain percentage of my product have to be produced in Vietnam to avoid the 145% China tariff?
I can try and take that one. Unfortunately, I don't really know the answer on that, Mark. I mean, again, it comes down to someone could easily send me an email and I could figure that out for them. I don't know what the percentage is. If it, again, back to what I was saying earlier, if it was all under one code, like it's under the board game code, and it meets the mark of whatever that percentage, the value is, then yeah, it could come from Vietnam, but we would have to look into that.
All right. So Emmy, we were planning to launch our campaign in late June to July, but should we consider the timing? Are there trends showing that U.S. backers are hesitant to make purchases on crowdfunding platforms right now? So I talked
There's
about...
no competition.
Yeah.
No one else is launching. There's like 6 games on Kickstarter right now. I'm exaggerating, but it's going to be easier to sell your game when you're not up against 150 games.
Agreed.
Yeah, there's, I talked about this earlier. I think there are 5 primary reasons that actually decrease risk, and one of them is decreased competition, which leads to decreased advertising costs, decreased freight costs. So we can send out that as well. Actually, Dusty, I think that message you sent only went to the hosts and panelists.
Well, now you guys, if you two have any questions,
yeah, Dusty put in his email. He's trying to put his email in chat, but it went only to Justin and I. He'll put that in again. So I mean, I have a guide and some more thoughts on that. CK, if you're on here, if you can put that in chat for everyone, the guide that we just wrote, that would be awesome. Or anyone on the Launch Boom team. Okay, we're gonna have to end here. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, Justin, do you mind throwing your email in there as well, or the best way to contact you, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put it in
the chat, or whatever is the best way for people to get in touch. I know there's more questions we didn't get to. I hope there was some overlap in the answers to answer the questions that we didn't technically get to. I was trying to look through them. I know there's a lot of stuff we're throwing in chat. That guide is just thrown in there. Justin just put in his email address. Dusty put in his email address. Thank you very, very much to both of them for taking time out of their day right now to talk about this on a subject that's rapidly changing. And thank you all for joining and all your questions. We're going to try to keep these going, more resources coming. So don't hesitate to reach out to us either, or myself personally. My email is mark@launchboom.com. And yeah, just stay in contact with us and we'll try to help in any way we can. So anyways, Justin, Dusty, thank you so much. And Amy as well. I know you're in the background. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, she's running around getting ready for a webinar she's going to do in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
nice.
So thank you all. And thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate it.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.